Hi, I'm Ken Jacobson, Senior Documentary Programmer, AFI Festivals, and I want to welcome you to AFI Fest 2020, presented by Audi, and to this Q&A for 40 Years a Prisoner, directed by Tommy Oliver. First, I want to thank our supporters of the festival, our presenting sponsor, Audi, our AFI members, and of course, you, our audience. 40 Years a Prisoner had its world premiere at this year's Toronto International Film Festival. We're absolutely thrilled to be presenting the US premiere of the film, and equally thrilled today to have with us director Tommy Oliver. Today's conversation will be moderated by Gil Robertson. Tommy Oliver was born in Philadelphia and studied economics and digital media at Carnegie Mellon University. He directed the short films Second Chances and Adjournment, and wrote, directed, and produced the feature 1982, which screened at the Toronto International Film Festival. He also produced Sundance and AFI Fest Audience Award winner Kinyarwanda and The Perfect Guy, a film that opened #1 in the country in 2015. He's also the co-creator of the docu-series Black Love. Writer and author Gil Robertson is the co-founder of the African American Film Critics Association, the largest group of Black film critics in North America. As its president, Gil oversees the annual AFCA Awards, which has become a recognized fixture of the Hollywood Awards season. Gil has written over 50 magazine covers and contributing bylines to a wide range of national publications. He's also the founder and creator of the nationally syndicated arts and lifestyle column, The Robertson Treatment, which has a reach of nearly 2 million. As an author, Gil has written and edited numerous books, including Not in My Family, AIDS in the African American Community, and Book of Black Heroes, Political Leaders, Past and Present. Thanks to both of you for being here today. I wish you a great conversation. And now, Gil, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Ken. Hey, Tommy.
There you go. Thank you, Ken. Thank you for having me here.
Wow. You know, watching this film on the heels of everything that's going on in America today, I tell you, it just really gave me a moment of pause. But let's go back to, as a Philadelphia native, I'm especially interested in finding out what was the inspiration behind you wanting to chronicle this part of the movement.
So I had heard of MOVE growing up, but I never really understood who they were or what happened or any of the details in any sort of cogent fashion. It was always just sort of like there was a bomb and there was MOVE and there was something, but I never understood, even though I grew up in Philly. And at some point, I just started to research things, and I'm a complete research junkie. And so I went through, I think, 7 or 8 books, and then probably about 60 articles. And then I learned there was an archive in Philly, the Temple Urban Archive, where there are 72 boxes worth of content. And I went through a lot of those. But then I also realized that there was still something that was missing, and it was sort of the human piece. And so I had a friend in Philly, Maxwell Brown. He made an intro to some of the MOVE members, and he made an intro to Ramona Africa, and she brought along Mike Africa Jr. with her. And Mike and I hit it off, and I had no idea that the folks who had been in prison in '78 were still in prison. I had no idea. And then beyond that, that he was born in prison, and it was just it was a crazy thing to understand. And then to understand that he was fighting to get them out, and I just sort of went from there, sort of naturally, where I just sort of started checking in, and there was never a plan for a documentary, and it just sort of happened as things were moving.
You know, I mean, let's talk about MOVE, the movement, the group, the organization. I grew up in Los Angeles, and their what they were doing even captured the attention, you know, way across the country. So how would you describe them? I mean, from my research, I I see that they were sort of a mix between the Black Panthers and the hippies of the time. Were they about Black protest, Black advocacy? What was Move?
They started as basically a back to nature group that wanted to be left alone, that wanted to sort of move away from a technology driven society. They grew their hair out naturally and had dreads. They ate unprocessed foods. They built things with their hands, and they just wanted to basically be left alone to do things in a way that they deemed as a sort of natural way of living. And so they were much closer to hippies in that way in the beginning than the Black Panther Party. Like, they also were composting and doing things now. You know, the idea of composting or dreads or eating raw foods, that's just a very progressive, I mean, it's barely even progressive at this point. And it's just sort of super left and liberal at worst. But back then it was seen as something different.
And so where does the so-called militancy begin?
As a result of a ton of interactions with the city and with the police. And so it sort of reminds me of something that's very true. The idea that a riot is the language of the unheard. And the idea that again and again, they were confronted by police officers and a lot of things happened. And people were beaten, women were beaten, women lost their kids, they were beaten to miscarry. And at some point, it was a matter of defending themselves and not willing to just sit back and watch those things happen. And Rizzo, who was a beat cop who rose to the police commissioner and then two-term city mayor, he ran the city where it was basically you could have safe streets or civil liberties. Pick one. And that didn't quite fly for Move, nor should it fly for most of us.
Yeah, I was struck by a line that I read as in researching their history. Slavery never ended. It was just disguise. And even today, we're still witnessing, that reality. Obviously, this is the summer of the year of, that Black protest has again landed on the front page with George Floyd and most recently Breonna Taylor. What were they reacting to though back then? Was it the same issues or was it something different?
There's always been this chasm between what those of us who grew up in the hood knew to be the case and what the cops portrayed as what was happening. So there's always been this giant difference between what we knew to be the case and what was portrayed as what was happening with the media or with cops. As in, there were so many people that they'd have an interaction with the cops and it'd be a terrible interaction, and then it would be misconstrued as something completely different. And there's only so much of that one can take, because that people did nothing wrong or people didn't do what they said, yet when it came time to try the cops or to move anything forward, it was always, well, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. But when that is what happened because you either saw it with your own eyes or somebody that you trusted told you about it, yet what the cop said was so radically different, it's a hard thing to reconcile that. And at some point it becomes too much.
So, talk about John Africa, who, I guess he would be best described as sort of a Huey Newton type character who actually was the leader of the Move movement in Philadelphia.
He was a little different than Huey. And insofar as it was very much about life for him. Like that was the thing that was more important than everything, and respecting all sorts of life, whether it was plant life or human life or animal life, and being very respectful and reverent of that. And the people who followed him sort of followed in that. And he was a somebody who because of those ideals, and they were so radically different, even though they were, I don't know, the idea of protesting against zoos and the treatment of animals, where it was sort of commonplace and accepted at that point, and people just sort of believed in what he was saying because they were tired of what's going on. Like one of the things that really sort of struck me and why this sort of resonated so much with me was that the things that they ultimately wound up fighting against in 1976, 77, 78, police brutality, wrongful incarceration, systemic racism, and just sort of the respect for life, like those are the things that we're still 40 some odd years later fighting against today. And that was his platform, if you will.
You know, given the organization's holistic platform, or at least holistic origins, I mean, where did the violence come from?
Defense is where it came from. It came from a matter of you're not going to keep beating us in the dark. And I grew up in Philly. I grew up in the hood, and I've had plenty of interactions with cops, and I've seen plenty of shit go down. And at some point, it's too much. At some point, the idea of seeing another friend or family member being so brutalized or disregarded, it becomes too much. And so for them, that's what happened. Where it's almost like people, it's to a certain extent is like it's academic. The idea of somebody being beaten to miscarry. It's like, yeah, it happened, and those things are maybe it didn't really happen, or if it did, there was some justification or what have you. But put yourself in the position of you know that happened, and that happened because it happened to your sister or to your friend or to somebody you saw every single day, and that's not the first time it happened. And that's no small thing because those things they don't go away overnight.
One of the things that struck me, I think the ultimate thing that struck me about 40 Years a Prisoner is that at its core, it's about Black love. And it centers around the character of
My
Mike
God.
Africa Jr. and his quest to see both of his parents freed after 40 years or nearly 40 years of incarceration. Talk about that relationship and how you made the decision to frame the film around his journey.
So at, there's one point in the film where once we get to August 8th, 1978, where we're in all of what was happening. And so the city getting ready for the siege, the whole setup and all of it. And right after the shooting starts, I cut away to Mike. And it was very intentional. And the reason for that was that this wasn't meant to be an action movie. This wasn't meant to glorify what was happening. And so oftentimes you see these things and we forget that there are people inside. We forget that there are decades long reverberations that come from those things. And so Mike was inside that house. He was inside of his mother's belly. And so it was meant to make sure that we are thinking about the people. And so for Mike, he is living proof of the scars, the scar tissue that comes from these sorts of things, where somebody like George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, people think about them, but they don't think about their families. They don't think about the damage that it will do. And so for Mike, he he was committed to getting his parents out of prison along with the other Move members because it was the only thing that he knew to do. And he just wanted his parents home. He had literally never seen either of his parents outside of prison. He had literally never seen his parents together. He had literally never hugged his mom outside of a prison. And the things that, again, we all take for granted, the small things. And for him, the fact that he had committed his life to getting his parents out, he's wanted his parents home. And Mike and Debbie are just lovely, positive people, and it's hard to really understand how they are so positive and so full of joy despite everything, or maybe it's in spite of. And so it's something that I've never seen in my life. And beyond that, to know that the parents were still madly and wildly in love, even though they hadn't seen each other in decades and talked to each other in decades.
You know, what I find interesting about you is that your body of work seems to hit on two themes. I mean, with Kinyarwanda, you talk about the Rwandan genocide, and I mean, some could argue that with this film, you're talking about, to some degree, the genocide of African Americans. And then obviously you and your wife are responsible for an enormously popular show on OWN that centers around Black love. Why are those two topics, those two themes important to you?
I think that looking at us as Black people, as fully realized non-stereotype people matters so much, because for so long we, one, haven't been telling our own stories, and two, the portrayals of us have been so lacking and oftentimes damning. And so I think it's our responsibility to show us for who we are and to show what's going on and to show us as loving people. And so that's so much of what Black Love does. It shows us as loving people, faults and all. And so it's like, marriage is hard, but we are committed to making it work, and we do. If you leave it to plenty of TV and film, well, it's all about the divorce party. It's all about the single parent home. It's all about these other things, but that's not the case. And Mike, he's a married father of four who is a great guy who just wanted his parents home. And so it's about that love and showing, like you said, like it's the other side. And so it's like you sometimes, there's a lot of attention paid now to what's been going on in our country and the violence, but there are very real scars that come from that. And so again, Mike is a living example of that. And so for me, it's just shining a light on those things. With Kinyarwanda, it was about, again, it was understanding the people who were in the middle of that and understanding that there was a hope and a commitment to forgiveness that was so very different than the story that had been told. And so for me, it's really just trying to look at these stories that are looking at us honestly and accurately and showing us for who we really are.
You know, another theme that's really prevalent in the film is obviously the criminal justice movement and the relationship between the African American community and the police. I mean, where do we go from here? Because to your earlier point, 40 plus years later, we're still grappling with a lack of clarity about how we should perceive them and how we should view them. Are they here to protect and serve, or are they here to harass and menace people who look like you and I?
Gil, it it breaks my heart that this film has been described as topical and alarmingly relevant. Like it breaks my heart. Like it really does. Like I don't care how much time I spent on this film. It would have, I would have been happy had right now this film would have just felt like it was passe because it's not where our country is, and that it had no place at a place like AFI because it just didn't make any sense. But there's no easy answer. I mean,
I mean,
it's
is the solution, I mean, is the solution better training or is it defund the police? I mean, where do
the
we,
police are doing. People talk about the system being broken. The police, the system, is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It grew out of slave catching, and it's doing what it was designed to do. And so we it requires real reform and a real change. And I think defunding the police is a part of what's needed. And but it's not just defunding, it's defunding and divesting. That money needs to go elsewhere. It needs to go to community policing, not policing the way that it's been done. It needs to go to the places and people who can deal with situations in a nonviolent way, because most of the police calls aren't for anything that require guns or anything close to it. Yet they deal with things in a way where if all you have is one tool, then that's all you know how to use. And so I think it's fundamentally flawed and has been for a very long time.
you know, given all that we see in this documentary, ultimately the documentary is about love and it's about a family reuniting. I mean, what are they doing today? What talk about, you know, being able to capture the experience of these three people coming together and as one, you know, after so much time. I mean, give us that update.
They are so happy together, and they spent 40 years apart. And it's something that nobody else but them gets. And their bond is stronger than it's ever been. And Debbie lived at Mike's place when she first got out, and then when Mike Senior got out, he lived there for a while, and then they moved out and they have a place together. And Mike was he was sort of giddy about it because he was excited that they were getting their own place, but it was almost like, hey, my kids are leaving, and so they're leaving the nest for the first time. But they have a place together, and they are just having a good time, sort of living life together. They see each other a lot, and it has been a bit of a rough transition, and just trying to figure out how to adjust to the world and figure out just things like working and because they
And cell phones.
and cell phones because the world's a very different place than when they left in 1978.
Wow. So, what should the takeaway be? I mean, what do you want people, what should the action items be once people finish watching the movie?
Well, one thing they can do is there's a GoFundMe for them, and they can go donate to them because it's really hard to maintain as somebody who has to check the box every time they apply for a job. And
And
so,
they've been locked out of society for nearly half a century. My dear Jesus.
yeah. And so beyond that, there's so much work that we all have to do. And the work isn't watching a documentary. The work isn't posting on social media. There's so much real meaningful work that needs to be done. And what people should do is figure out how to get involved. They should figure out what they can do that will actually make a material difference. Because the world that we're in right now is not the world that I want my kids to take over. It's not the world that I would wish on any other person. And so we have a lot of fucking work to do.
And so what's become of Move? My understanding is that the last prisoner, literally, after 42 years, was just released from jail. I mean,
So
what's
very, very sadly, so Delbert Africa got out in January and he passed away 5 months after that. And so he spent 42 years in prison, got out, died 5 months after.
so for those who are interested in more information about the Move movement, where can they go?
There's a Move Facebook page. It's probably the best place. And if you search for probably the Move organization or Move on Facebook, there's also a Move IG page.
Terrific. Tommy, thank you so much for bringing this event front and center. We appreciate you.
Thank you for all that you do. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate you highlighting us in a very meaningful and honest way. It goes a long way and it is appreciated.